The person that you can completely map and who only does positive things for you, it's like A, you don't know that person. B, they're not communicating with you, nor you with them. Maybe they're just subordinating themselves to you or you to them. And you're not growing. You want someone who can, a real relationship is a wrestling match. It's a grappling phenomena that you both emerge transformed from. And that's what people want. They don't want a pushover. Not unless there's something wrong with them. You know, a narcissistic person who never wants to be challenged will want a partner who does nothing but deliver exactly what they're told to deliver, but they will mistreat them beyond belief. What does the optimal relationship look like in terms of positive and negative emotion? You might say, well, utopia. Nothing but positive interactions. It's like, no. Imagine you get people to code the interactions they have with their partner during the day. You know, you sample it. You say, was that interaction positive or negative? And then what you're trying to do is predict the longevity of the relationship. Okay, so here's the data. If it falls under 5 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction, the relationship doesn't continue. Fair enough, too much negative. That's easy to understand. If it exceeds 11 positive to 1 negative, the relationship doesn't last. Why? No challenge. Right? What do you want from your partner? Bliss? No. No, you don't. So you'll have fantasies about the ideal. That often happens in a romantic relationship, especially at the beginning of it. Because you project your idealization onto the person that you're romantically attracted to. That's the projection of an archetype. So Jung would say, the woman will project an animus onto the man. The animus is her conceptualization of what the ideal man is. It's unconscious because it's rooted in fantasy. And the man will be in concordance with that projection in some areas. Those are the areas where she likes him, by the way, and will be discordant in other areas. And that's the areas where she constantly disappoints him as the relationship develops. So the projection is there in part to help the person understand who it is that they're dealing with, because when you meet someone, you have to assume something about them. It's the same as projection. You have to assume something about them, and if you find them fascinating, which is what happens if you fall in love, maybe it's because they smell good or they're symmetrical or something, you immediately assume that, well, those things really matter. You immediately assume that they embody the ideal. It's an oversimplification, but the oversimplification has a basis, and the basis is, if it's interesting to me, it must be close to the ideal. Well, yeah, except the person that you're going out with, attracted to, is warped and bent and flawed and twisted in 300 ways, and you'll find that out soon enough, just as they will about you. And that often just blows the relationship into bits, because the person will say, well, she wasn't who I thought she was. It's like, well, whoever said she was who you thought she was? It's like, where did you get the misapprehension that she was going to be who you thought she was? God, what do you know? You're led around by your sense of smell and your ability to detect symmetry. You have an intimate relationship. You've had it for 10 years. You trust your partner. So what does that mean? You know where you are. You know who you are. And you have a pretty good idea of where you're going. And then one day you'll find out that your partner has been cheating on you, not with one person, but with 3 people. And for the whole 10 years. Well, hypothetically, that comes as a shock. Although you may have ignored many intimations that such might be the case. Irrelevant. Let's say it comes as a shock. Well, what happens to you? Well, you don't know where you are. You don't know where you've been. That's interesting, eh? Because you think you know where you've been because you've already been there, but all of a sudden something can happen so that you are so flipped over that you don't even know where you were. So that means, in some sense, the past is dependent on the present. A very peculiar thing. You also have no idea where you're going. In terms of not knowing where you are, that's deep, eh? Because you might think, well, I thought it was in a marriage. That turns out to be wrong. I thought I knew who my wife or husband was. That turns out to be wrong. I concluded on the basis that I knew my wife, that I knew something about women. That turned out to be wrong. I thought I was in a relationship with someone I could trust. That is wrong. I don't know enough about trust. I'm obviously too gullible. And so what that does is throw virtually everything that's ever happened to me in severe doubt, right? That's the emergence of chaos. And that's this. Sometimes you're going from point A to point B, And something you don't expect manifests itself in the middle of your plan, but it's not such a catastrophe because you can just work around it. And then sometimes something pops up and like you just do not have a plan anymore. And so then you might ask yourself, just exactly where are you when you don't know where you are? And I would say that's a place. And it's actually a place that's well documented in classic religious and mythological stories. That's chaos. The Taoists, for example, they believe that the world is made out of chaos and order. Well, order, that's where you are when what you do gets you what you want. Chaos, that's where you are when you have no idea what's going on. And you might ask, well, is there a way that you should act when you're in chaos? And the answer to that is, there better be, because it's a place you're going to visit several times during your life. And everyone visits that. And so let's say they got post-traumatic stress disorder because a relationship collapsed on them suddenly, which is quite common. You know, they get betrayed or someone leaves them suddenly, and then they don't know what to do, because, especially if they're conscientious, because then they just tear themselves into pieces trying to figure out what they did wrong to bring about that event. And the reason they're doing that is because they want to retool their perceptions and their actions so that the probability that they'll have the same experience again is minimized. And their mind won't leave them alone until they do it. And no wonder, right? Because if you fall into a big pit and you get really hurt, the first thing you should figure out is how to not fall into big pits anymore. And your mind is set up exactly for that. And so what you do with someone who's having problems like that, so maybe they're waking up at the middle of the night obsessing about what went wrong, is you walk them through it. You do a situational analysis first, because one of the oversimplifications that people make, and this is especially true for conscientious people, is if something bad happened to me, I must have done something to deserve it. Now that's actually a pretty functional idea, because it suggests that there are things about your behavior that you could change that would make the future better. But the problem is that, say if it's the collapse of a relationship and you've been with that person for 8 years or longer, well, you did so many things with them that the idea that you did something wrong pretty much extends to every single thing you ever did with them. And that's, how are you going to fix that? And so that's part of the trauma, actually. The trauma is 80 million snakes all at the same time. It's like, well, forget it. You don't have time to go through all that material. And so partly what you do is with people, and this is what you should do with yourself too, is you do a situational analysis. It's like, don't be assuming necessarily that the thing that happened to you only happened to you because of what you did or didn't do. There's all sorts of factors at play.